everyone, my name is Mallory. Welcome to my channel. I'm so happy that you're here today. I cannot believe that it is already the end of June. I feel like the first 6 months of this year have flown by. Today, I'm going to be doing a mid-year wrap-up where I'm going to be talking you through all of the books that I've read so far this year, and I'm going to be touching on some of my reading goals that I have for the last 6 months of this year. So let's get into it. So let's start with January. Right away at the beginning of January, I listened to the audiobook version of One Nation Under Guns. This book was about gun violence and how it got started in America, and then it also really dove into why the author believes that it is still going on. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. However, I read this book because it had just happened to be after a major shooting, and I felt like instead of just posting about something on Instagram saying that it wasn't okay, I needed to educate myself on why this continues to happen. So my friend recommended this. It was a really fascinating read, and I do feel like I learned a lot from it. I am able to recognize, though, that there is still much more to learn and much more for me to educate myself on. But I would recommend this if you are interested in learning more about this topic, or if you, like me, are trying to educate yourself on it. The second book that I read in January was another audiobook, and you'll see that that's going to be a big theme for January, February, those first couple months of the year. I listened to The Golden Spoon. This was a book that my book club picked, and I ended up liking it. When I read a mystery or a thriller, I can never guess the twist. This one had me hooked. I had no idea where it was going, and it was fun to listen to as an audiobook because there are a lot of different characters mentioned. This book takes place from the perspective of many different characters, and so having the full cast audiobook ended up being really helpful for me to try to piece together who was speaking, whose perspective it was. I feel like it might have been a little bit harder for me to physically read it and try to keep all of that organized. So listening to this as an audiobook is how I would recommend listening to it if you're interested. I would say that this was giving it vibes of Great British Bake Off, but with that mystery thriller presence, so it felt a little bit more tense than just the cozy baking vibes, but I liked the mix of them together. I also listened to the book Old School by Gordon Korman, and this one was a heartwarming read. I loved this book. It is about a young boy who goes to live with his grandma in a retirement community and has to attend real school for the first time. It was absolutely adorable. The words and phrases that this child picked up on, the mannerisms that he had from living in the retirement community, seeing all of that play out in a actual school environment was really fun. I felt like this was a great story about friendship. This is super lighthearted. It is a children's book. I'd say it's not even YA. It's definitely younger than that, but it was such a great palate cleanser after the past 2 books that I had read. And I would literally recommend this to anyone, even if you are an adult and you don't really like children's literature. But if you want to have a good time and just be smiling and laughing, this is a great read for you. The next book I read is going to maybe be a hot take or a controversial take. I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I didn't really like it. This book had been so hyped up for me that I think having that hype almost ruined the experience for me. I just felt like it was kind of boring. I've talked before that I don't really read a lot of contemporary fiction, and so maybe that opinion is coming into play here, but it was just not for me. I felt like it really picked up at 75%, and at the 75% through the end, I was invested. But up until that point, I was bored and I was really struggling to get through it. I'm disappointed because a lot of my friends really like it, and a lot of people that I have seen on Instagram also really like it. So this was a disappointing one for me. I can't say I'd recommend it. However, like I said, I know a lot of people who did, and so maybe this one would be for you, but it just wasn't for me. Another book that just wasn't really my style and for me was Butcher and Blackbird. This is a dark romance. Be sure to check the trigger warnings before you read it. There was nothing in it that overly bothered me, but I just couldn't get into the story. It wasn't my cup of tea. The characters to me felt a little flat, and the plot line, sure, there were some interesting moments, but I just wasn't vibing with the story. It didn't hook me in an emotional way like I really want a romance book to do. Maybe that was because this was my first dark romance that I've ever read, and so it was a little bit of a style change. So I had to get used to the way that it was written and the topics that were included in it. I read this on my Kindle, and I feel like if you're going to read it, that could be a good way because it was really fast paced. I was able to just really click through really fast as I was reading. And if you're a fan of dark romance, you might like it. But if you aren't, then you might want to steer clear. The final book that I read in January was The Alchemist. I really enjoyed reading this book. When I bought this a couple years ago, there was a tag next to it that a bookseller had written to kind of describe what this book is. And on the tag, it was written that you will read this book when it is the right time. This book will find you. And I do feel like that was true reading this. I felt like this book was unlike any other book I have ever read. The language in it is definitely giving a classic novel. It is not contemporary. I'm trying to figure out when it was written. It came out in 1988, so that makes sense why it wasn't contemporarily written, but it wasn't hard to understand. This story is about a boy who goes on this long journey to try to find the alchemist. And along the journey, a lot of different things happen to him. I felt like it was an interesting story, and I felt like I could relate to it in ways that I wasn't expecting. I think it is such a beautiful back cover, by the way. Okay, it looks like this, beautiful moon. It says, "To realize one's destiny is a person's only obligation." As I've gotten older, I've thought a lot about destiny and fate and what it is that I need to be doing with my life. I feel like that feeling is not lost amongst many people. I feel like as you grow older, everyone starts to think about that and wonder, what is the rest of my life going to be like? Where am I heading? What is the direction I'm going in? And this is a beautiful novel that really hits on that idea. When I was describing this book, I was saying that he's trying to find the alchemist, but that's not true. He's trying to find treasure, and he stumbles upon the alchemist on his journey. but he learns a lot of interesting lessons, and it's a short book. It's not very long at all. So if you're looking for a short and interesting classic to read, I would really recommend this one. I felt like it was finding me at the perfect time, just like that bookseller's note said it would. In February, I read 5 books, and the first book that I read was called Enemies in the Orchard. This one was another audiobook, and it was about World War II soldiers that were captured and living and working in Michigan on an apple orchard. This story hit me in the heart in a way that I didn't expect. It's another younger story. It's not necessarily geared towards adults. However, the topic is very adult-like. I feel like it's hard to write about such an intense, sad topic to children, but this one was very well written. It was a novel written in verse. However, I listened to it and it was still equally as beautiful as it would have been reading it on the page. It was so heartfelt, and I felt like the emotions that the author was trying to portray really came through about what it would be like to live in that time and have this experience happen to you. It was on both sides. So one perspective was from a girl whose family owned the orchard, and then the other perspective was of a soldier that was living and working there for them. Both perspectives were very well written, and like I said, I felt like I was living through the characters. The emotions were so strong, and the ending absolutely destroyed me. Even though it was sad, heartfelt, I would still really recommend giving that one a listen. It was one of the more unique books I've ever read. The next book that I read was called Really Very Crunchy, and this is written by someone who actually has a Instagram page where she makes different videos kind of making fun of the stereotypical crunchy people. This book was very informative. It was all about how to reduce toxins in your life and about how prevalent it really is in everything. She talked about food, clothing, cleaning materials, so much more. If you have children and you're trying to get into more of a low tox lifestyle, this could also be a really great resource for you, because she has children and she talks about that experience and trying to live in a more crunchy way while having kids. If you don't have kids, then this is also really applicable to you. I felt like I, as someone who does not have children, was still able to learn a lot from this. And it had a lot of practical tips and switches that you could easily implement into your life. As someone who had been wanting to learn more about this for quite a while, I felt like this was a really great starter book to kickstart and begin making some of those changes. This made it really easy to do that. Another audiobook thriller that I listened to was called What the Wife Knew. Again, I am not good at predicting twists, and so this one had me with my jaw dropped constantly. It was all over the place. It was an interesting perspective to listen to on audio. It felt a little jumbled, but in the end, I was able to understand what was going on. The ending was a little bit more confusing, but like I said, I was able to figure out what was happening. This one was easy. I feel like all thrillers and mystery books are pretty easy and fast-paced to read or listen to. This one I enjoyed. I was trying to remind myself of what it was about, and it was one of those books that is a little bit forgettable, but I remember having a good time when I was listening to it. I also listened to It Happened One Summer on audiobook, and this one also had my jaw dropped, but in a different way. This book was a very spicy romance. It was a little cheesy at times. They weren't my most favorite couple that I've ever read about. I'm not even sure that I'm gonna give the next book in the series a try. This is another book that had been really hyped up to me from Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms. So I was excited to give it a try, but I am feeling a little underwhelmed by it. I think just because I've read so many other really great romances, this one just didn't measure up. I think mostly because of the way that the characters were written, to be honest. It wasn't really vibing with me. The final book that I read in February was The Favorites, and this book is an emotional roller coaster. This is like the opposite of the previous book that I just talked about. It is one that will have you on the edge of your seat. It is a toxic relationship, but a intriguing and heartfelt at times relationship. This is about two figure skaters that are a pairs figure skating team, and it is about their journey through different competitions and through their career. But it is so much more than that because so much happens in this story. My friends and I read this for our book club, and afterwards we had our book discussion and we sat and watched figure skating videos for like an hour because we couldn't get it out of our minds. I feel like everyone, maybe every girl at least, has had a point in their lives where they've seen figure skaters and they're like, that looks so fun, I wish that was me. Or it's just a feeling like you get entertained when you watch it. This was like that. This was very entertaining. It was, like I said, an emotional roller coaster. I feel like that's a pretty good way to describe it. This is a contemporary fiction book that I actually really enjoyed. In March, I decided that I needed to start reading more books off of my physical TBR. So the first one that I ended up going with was Better Than the Movies. This book was so adorable. Also, I just think the cover is really cute and it has these really adorable sprayed edges too. This one was recommended to me by a friend, and this one was exactly what I wanted my romance book to be like. I don't know if it is YA, like I don't know if it would be classified as that, but it was a more sweet, lighthearted romance. I think that the friends to lovers relationship between Liz and Wes is so cute. This one was giving me all the romantic comedies feels. I loved how she cared so much about old romantic movies and being wooed almost in a way that is a little bit more classic. Seeing the childhood relationship between Liz and Wes in like the fun kid way was really cute. And then seeing them as they got older and turning from almost enemies into friends, into lovers was really just absolutely adorable. I think that this one is really great if you are looking for something lighthearted and just fun. This is another book where if you want to be smiling as you're reading this, then this is a really great choice. This is everything that I wanted some of those other romances to be. The next book that I read was A Song to Drown Rivers, and I actually listened to this as an audiobook, which I would highly recommend. This book was so beautiful. It was beautifully written. The plot was beautiful. The characters were wonderful. The storyline was so interesting to me. It was a premise of a girl in China goes to be a spy in her enemy's territory by marrying the king. I feel like I learned so much more about Chinese culture from reading this story, and it wasn't even a book about that, really. This book got me in my feels many times. It was one that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I read it. I loved this so much. I recommend it to everybody. I would scream from the rooftops how much I love this book. I was feeling really excited because those were two really great books in a row, and I was on a high and was excited for the next book, which was The Measure. I was excited to read this book because it has such an interesting premise. The premise is that everyone one day gets delivered a box, and inside the box is a measure of how long your life is. I think this concept is so interesting, and the book really dealt with that idea of, would you open your box or not? Would you want to know how long your life was going to be, or would you just want to live it oblivious, not knowing? I want to say that I would not open the box, but it would be really challenging not to if my husband or all of my friends or my family decided that they wanted to open theirs. It would be tempting to want to open it. So this book deals with the idea of, how do you kind of control this mass chaos that could result from this situation. They don't explain how the strings are accurate, which I think is fine. I don't think that's needed. There was some points of execution in the story that I felt could have been better. In the end, there were some things that were left feeling a little lackluster, but I still would read this book again if I was going back in time and hadn't read it yet. I still would want to read it because of that interesting concept. I don't think I have ever heard of a story with that premise before. The next book that I read was The Rose Bargain. I picked this up because there was a girl on my Instagram that loved this story, and when she was talking about it, it was giving me all of the vibes that I love in a story. It's YA, it's fantasy, and it's romance. I love all of those things when they are combined together, and it was giving me such great vibes that I was so excited to read it. I read this book in one sitting. That's how good it was. I read it in one sitting. I also just think this is such a beautiful copy of this book. I'm happy to have it on my shelves. Look at the design on the inside of the cover. And the cover as well is so gorgeous. It's got this foil on it that kind of shines in the light. In this story, everybody gets a bargain with the fairy queen. All of the girls in this land, when they reach a certain age in society, they go individually and meet with the queen, and they make a bargain with her. So they get something in return, but they have to give something up. So for example, maybe you ask for eternal beauty, but you have to give up one of your toes, something like that. There was a big twist in this story that I did not see coming, and the ending left in a really great spot where I know that there's going to be another book in the series. So I'll be really curious to see where the story goes. There were some things at the end where I thought it could have been a little bit different or better, so I'll be curious to see where it picks up in the next book in the series. I also read a hockey romance in the month of March called Pucking Around. This one was one of the more interesting romance books I've read. It was very spicy, and it was a multi-relationship story. Haven't really read anything like that. I typically love hockey romances, but I kind of decided after reading this that I like them to be a little bit more lighthearted. In the romance books I've read this year that I've talked about already, you can see that is kind of a theme with me. So after reading this, I kind of figured that I better just kind of stick with what I know that I'm gonna like. That being said, it was an easy read, and I can't say that it was horrible. There were a lot of interesting things that I enjoyed, but just not my favorite romance. The final book I read in March was Taproot, and this is a graphic novel. It is about a gardener who can speak with beings from the underworld. It kind of covers a couple different perspectives in a way. It is about this guy who can communicate with ghosts, and the ghost in the story is really nice. The gardener is really nice. This was pretty lighthearted. It was a very easy read. Whenever I read a graphic novel, I feel like it's over so quickly. I don't have a lot of feelings about this one either way. It was fine, and I enjoyed it. I don't regret reading it, but it certainly wasn't the best graphic novel I've ever read. April was a fantastic reading month for me, and I actually ended up reading a lot of books that I had been very excited to read. So the first book that I read was Onyx Storm, which is the third book in the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. I loved Fourth Wing. I enjoyed Iron Flame. And Onyx Storm left me so confused. I did enjoy reading it. It is one of those ones where I had been waiting and waiting, so excited for it to come out. And when I read it, I felt like I devoured it because I had been so excited for so long. I don't want to give anything away about this story because I feel like Fourth Wing is a series where so much happens in every book. It is packed to the brim of adventure and events. So I don't want to say anything that would give it away because I know that if I hadn't read this book yet, I wouldn't want anything spoiled. But I will say that the ending left me with my jaw on the ground and dying to read the next one when it comes out. After that one, I moved on to another book that was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and that was Sunrise on the Reaping. I love this book so much. If you have heard me talk about the Hunger Games series, you would know that the Hunger Games series is maybe my favorite series of all time. It is the series that got me into reading. I remember reading it for the first time when I was in 8th grade, and it completely consumed me. It is one of those all-time infinity star series for me. So the fact that Suzanne Collins continues to put out books in this series just makes me feel so happy. I loved hearing Haymitch's story. This book shocked me in so many ways because I could not have predicted where this story was going. One thing I love about Suzanne Collins is that she says she writes a book when something needs to be told. And this book felt very relevant to the time that we are living in now. I could understand why she released this when she did. When I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I enjoyed that one, but it didn't capture me in the way that I had wanted it to. This one fully captured me. I will never stop thinking about this story. It honestly made me want to go back and reread the original series so that I could have some more context to his character. I am so excited for the movie version of this to come out. Every single time one of the new cast members gets released, I always have a friend that I message, and we both have been like, the casting director needs a raise, because every character seems like it's going to be just about perfect for the person that they play in this story. I'm really excited. This had so much nostalgia for me, but it also brought me so much excitement in the way that the story progressed. There were lots of twists and turns in here that I didn't see coming. I'm seriously so excited to see what else Suzanne Collins continues to write. I'm really hoping that we will get some more Hunger Games books soon. I would love to hear more about certain characters' stories. If you know me, you know I love the character of Finnick Odair. Love to get his Hunger Games story. A lot of people have said they would really enjoy reading Effie Trinket's story. I would love that too. There's so many characters. I think that honestly I would read any book from any of the characters' perspectives at this point. This one is so close to my heart. I love this book. I love this series. I'll never get over it. For my book club, I listened to the book No Place Left to Hide. This wasn't my favorite mystery thriller that I've ever read. It was clearly a YA story in a bad way. I say bad as like a bad way just because I can't really think of another way to describe it. It just wasn't very complex. Again, I still didn't catch the twist, but it just wasn't the most complex story. Maybe you don't need it to be super complex, and that's fine. But for me, I do like when it is a little bit more in-depth. I read this on my Kindle and I read it very fast. It was super fast paced. I felt like I was able to finish this quickly because it was able to hook me in. I thought that it was an interesting story. It's about a girl whose friend ends up passing away, and it's left on kind of a cliffhanger note of how did this happen? People don't really accept the story of what she and other people are claiming happened on the evening of her passing. And so there is someone who's out there trying to almost frame her or try to figure out if she had a part in that passing. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the best thriller I've ever read. After that, I moved on to another anticipated release that I had been extremely excited for, and that was Enchantra. Last year, I was absolutely obsessed with the first book in this series from Kaylee Smith called Phantasma. It blew me away. I was so invested in that story. I loved it so much that I was so excited for this one to come out, and this one did not disappoint. This is another romance book. It is a little bit spicy. It has hints of dark romance, but it's not as intense as Butcher and Blackbird. When I think about it being a dark romance, I think of it being that way because there are paranormal characters. This one is very similar to Phantasma in the sense that it revolves around some type of game. I really liked the character of Genevieve, and I really liked Rowan's character. I loved all of the side characters in this as well. This is another one that I absolutely devoured. I read this so quickly. I just think that the way that Kaylee Smith writes is so entrancing. I feel like she's got me under a spell when I'm reading these books. Like, I just can't put it down or step aside. I need to just continue to finish it and consume it. So I loved this one. I'm really excited to see where the next one goes because I'm not sure. The ending of this one has me wondering who the next book's main character is going to be. I'm really excited for her to continue this series. The final book that I read during April was a book of essays. For a book challenge that I've been doing every month, one of my friends has given different prompts, and this one was to read a collection of essays. I think I chose the wrong book. I wish I had read a different book for this. It was just a little boring to me, and I don't want to say it's because it was essays, because I feel like if I read a book of essays on a different topic, I would have enjoyed it more. This one was very aimless. All of these essays were written about completely different things. There were a few that were very interesting and well written, but for the most part, it just didn't capture me in the way that I wanted it to. The first book that I finished in May was Assassin's Blade, and this one made me really excited because I feel like I am revived back into the Throne of Glass series. I read the first two books in the series. I believe it is Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight. And after I read those, I just wasn't super into the series. But a friend of mine and so many people on Instagram and other platforms absolutely love Throne of Glass. So I really wanted to stick it out. And I told myself I'm going to read Assassin's Blade, and if I don't like it, then I'm gonna really take a big pause. But when I read Assassin's Blade, I fell in love with this series. It made me so pumped up to read the next book. I'm really anticipating the next one, Heir of Fire. I wish that I had read Assassin's Blade first rather than waiting a couple books. I understand why the recommended order is to read it third, even though it's a prequel. I understand why, because there are some things that happen in it that would spoil a few things that happened in the first two books. However, I feel like it gave me better context to why Celaena acts the way that she does. I wish that I had read Assassin's Blade first because I feel like I would have enjoyed the first two books in Throne of Glass a lot more than I did. All that to say, I'm excited to be back into that world and continue to read because I've heard that the books going forward from this point are amazing. So I am just feeling really great about that. I'm glad that I finally ended up reading Assassin's Blade. I also read The Paradise Problem, which was another really fun romance book. There was some spice. It is one of those books that has some fake dating, fake relationship tropes in it, and I really enjoy books that have that. So this one felt really fun. It took place on a tropical island, which almost made me feel transported there myself. I needed some of those fun vibes at the time that I read this. It was a super easy book to read. I ended up reading it when I was sitting at a garage sale that we were having and finished it super quick. Another book that I read really quickly was Is She Really Going Out With Him? And this was another one that I enjoyed. I didn't like it as much as The Paradise Problem. I definitely feel like I will seek out more Christina Lauren books after reading The Paradise Problem. Not sure if I can say the same after reading Is She Really Going Out With Him? I did like it. I really enjoyed the main character's children in the story. They were really fun. What they have to do is they pick people for her to go on dates with. And she ends up writing a column about it. She also has a rival journalist who's also writing a similar column of going out on dates. And so there's a little bit of a rivals to lovers situation, which is another trope that I really enjoy. So this one was good. There were just some things about the main male character that kind of icked me out at sometimes, but I don't regret reading either of these books. Especially Paradise Problem. I really enjoyed that one. The next two books I read were a part of the Windy City series. This is a sports romance series that I have really loved reading. I read the first book, which is called Mile High. I read that quite a while ago, and I had heard from everyone that that was kind of the worst one in the series. So when I read The Right Move and Caught Up, I was definitely expecting it to be better, and it did not disappoint. I especially loved The Right Move. That one has a basketball setting, and then Caught Up has a baseball setting. I read both of these really quickly. Caught Up was a book that I enjoyed for some of the mental health representation in it. I felt like there was a lot of struggles that the two main characters went through, and I really enjoyed seeing how they overcame those struggles and how they ended up coming together. I just felt like the characters in that story both had my heart. I also really enjoyed reading Caught Up, but not in the same way. It was still really fun to read, and I liked the characters, but not as much as I did in The Right Move. In Caught Up, it's a single dad and his nanny that end up getting together. She's also a chef, which was a really fun perspective to include in the story. I loved the family elements of that book. It really tugged on my heartstrings in a really great way. I recently started the next book in the series called Play Along. I recently started the next book in the series, which is also about a baseball player. It's actually the brother of the main male character in Caught Up. And I'm not super far yet, but I'm enjoying it in the first 15% that I've read. In June, I've also read a couple books that are going to be sticking with me for a while. The first one is Broken Country. I read this for my book club, and I liked this one so much more than I was expecting. It's a historical fiction, which is another genre that I haven't read a ton of, but after reading that one, I want to read more. It was one where it tells you right in the first couple pages almost how it's going to end, and then it dissects how they got there. This one jumps around in point of view, so if you're listening to it on an audiobook, I would say it's not really one you could have on in the background. You could certainly listen to it by audio, but I definitely preferred reading it on my Kindle so that I could keep everything straight. It's one of those stories where it feels like it is so emotional because it seems like it's something that could happen to someone. Certainly has not happened to me, but it could happen to someone. It was just a really touching story, and it ended in a way that I didn't expect. And even though it kind of told you in the beginning where it was going to go throughout the story, the ways that it got to those main plot points were not what I was expecting. I also finally finished listening to an audiobook called The Wandering Inn. This was one that I and a friend listened to because a coworker of ours recommended it. It was a long read. It was like 24 hours to listen to this, and it was a bit of a nerdy fantasy book. Certainly not one that I would typically go for. It takes place from the perspective of a lot of different characters, and the premise is that some of these characters one day walk around a corner and end up in a magical fantasy world. One of the characters ends up running a magical inn. That's kind of where the title comes from. If you're a big fan of insane world building and very deep magic systems, maybe you would enjoy this. However, I feel like I can't fully recommend it because it is such a time commitment. The book is interesting because it is all written online. You have to find it at a website The only way I was able to listen to this was through Audible. My book club and I for June ended up reading Till Summer Do Us Part. All of us felt the exact same way about it. We were not into this story. I normally love a cheesy romance, but this was too much for me. And when I read a romance, I also am the kind of person who enjoys when they are not realistic, but this was too unrealistic for even me. The idea of the story is that the main character works at a company where everyone is married. She is recently divorced. All of her coworkers are talking about things that they're going to go do with their spouses, and she's feeling a little left out. She's feeling like she needs to kind of impress them, and she says that she has a husband, even though she does not. And the whole rest of the story diverges from there. I just felt like that wasn't a premise I could get behind, because I felt like no one would do that. Even when it's an unrealistic book, it's like, okay, maybe that could happen. But for this, I felt like this whole story was like, this wouldn't happen. They go to a summer camp and it's just all over the place. I also wasn't into the main male character. He had a lot of things about him that kind of icked me out. And the girl I also just felt was kind of annoying. I feel really bad criticizing this book, but it just, I didn't really enjoy it. A book that I finished recently is Intermezzo. Maybe you saw my previous video where I really go into depth reading that one. This is a contemporary fiction book that when I started it, I didn't really enjoy it. However, as the story progressed, I really became to enjoy it a lot more. At the end of the story, I felt very satisfied and happy that I continued and stuck it out and finished it. It's definitely a slice of life contemporary fiction book. It deals a lot with grief. The main characters, their father has just recently passed away, and so it bounces around between the two brothers' perspectives. And it also bounces to a third perspective, which I won't spoil whose perspective that is in case you're interested in reading the book. I talked about in my other video about how I am not a huge fan of Sally Rooney's writing style. The fact that she doesn't use quotation marks and how she uses really short sentences kind of throws me off when I'm reading. However, as I got further, I did definitely get more used to that. In the end, I can say that the characters were interesting. The plot did shape up to be something that I felt worthwhile reading it in the end. I would recommend this book to somebody who enjoys contemporary fiction, or if you have read Sally Rooney's books in the past and have liked them. The final book that I'm going to talk about today is Manacled, and that is one that has my whole entire heart. Manacled is a fan fiction about Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. I had been wanting to read this for so long, but was nervous too because of my history with hyped up books not meeting my expectations. But this one blew me away. I did not grow up being the biggest Harry Potter fan. However, I don't think you need to have that nostalgia factor to enjoy this story. The best way I can describe this book is it is an intense, emotional roller coaster. The premise is that Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix has lost a war to Voldemort, and almost everyone on their side is dead except for Hermione and a couple other people. And the story, even though it's a fan fiction, is written so beautifully. I feel like when you think of a fan fiction book, you don't anticipate it being similar to a beautifully written novel. I just anticipate fan fiction being a little bit more rough around the edges, but no, this one was excellent, and I have heard that it's getting traditionally published. So I will be excited to buy a copy to have on my shelves. I did end up downloading this to my Kindle. There are ways you can look up online to do that if you're interested. However, I might recommend just waiting until it gets traditionally published so you can continue to support that author. I know that I will be purchasing a copy because I loved it so much. If you want to see the footage of my reactions and emotional responses to that book, you should check out my previous video. And if you've been wanting to read Manacled, you 100% should. It was so good. Okay, I'm popping on here to give a little update since I filmed this video. The version of Manacled that's being published is called Alchemized, and it's been changed a little bit, so it's not specifically about the characters of Draco and Hermione. I do believe that it just has changed their names and some of the circumstances surrounding those details so that it could be traditionally published. So now thinking about my Goodreads goal, I have read 34 books so far this year. My goal that I set for the year is 65 books. I feel that at this point, I can reach that goal. In the summer, I'm typically able to read a lot more than I am during the other parts of the year. So I'm hoping that in July and August, I can get a lot more reading done. I feel like halfway through the year, I'm just about halfway through my goal. So that makes me feel like I will be able to accomplish this. I have a lot of books on my physical TBR that I'm really dying to get to. Really hoping to read a lot of Ali Hazelwood books. I'm really hoping that I can continue on in the Throne of Glass series. I'm also really excited for the series Once Upon a Broken Heart. I actually just posted recently on my Instagram about the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition that I recently bought of that series. So there are a lot of really great things that I can fill the rest of my year reading. And another big goal of mine beyond reading 65 books is to make a big dent in my physical TBR. A lot of the books that I own are books that I have not read. And so a huge goal is to read a lot of the books on my shelves. I have a bad habit of buying a lot of books and then they sit on my shelves for a really long time. So I'm hoping to break that habit and read a lot more physical books. I would love to hear in the comments what are some books you've read this year that you have really enjoyed. I think my favorites so far have been Manacled, Enchantra, and Sunrise on the Reaping. Those are 3 books that have my whole entire heart and that I'm going to be thinking about for a really long time. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about some of these books, and I hope that you will be able to check some of these out and read some of them. I know that I've enjoyed the reading I've done so far this year, and I am thrilled to see what else I will accomplish in my reading goals for the rest of 2025. Thanks again for watching. I hope you will subscribe and stick around, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.